Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We pick up today on Kuf Yud Amid Beis. We're holding in the midst of Hilchas Yom Tov Siman Taf Tzadik Ches, and we begin today on the top line of Kuf Yud Amid Beis with Sif Tez Zayin. We're continuing to discuss the halachas of shechita on Yom Tov, and in particular, we've been discussing the issue of kisuy hadam. We know that when you shecht a chaya, a non-domesticated animal, or an oif, a bird, a fowl, a chicken, a goose, a duck, you have to do kisuy hadam. You have a specific mitzvah. You have to cover up the dam, the blood of the animal. It has to be covered with afar tichuach, with loose dirt, both on bottom and on top. So you have to sprinkle down some loose earth. You have to shecht the fowl over the loose dirt so that some of the blood at least will fall down onto that dirt, and then you cover it up with more dirt. And we're discussing the issue of having dirt that you're allowed to use on Yom Tov for the kisuy hadam. So the Mechaber says, Hichnis afar harbe lebeisai. If you bring a large quantity of dirt into your house, litzarech kinasai. Now the reason you brought in this earth is because you're preparing this earth to use in your garden. You have a garden patch, you have a garden, and you need some earth, you need some soil in your garden. So you gathered together a large quantity of soil, you brought it into the house, and it is piled up, prepared for use in the garden. Says the Mechaber, mutar lechasois bay. You're allowed to then use some of that earth on Yom Tov to use it for the purpose of kisuy hadam, and we do not consider that earth to be muktzah. Why? Shekol zman shehu tzavor, because as long as that large quantity of earth. Now remember, what did you bring this earth in for? Really, you gathered together and you brought in this large quantity of earth intending to use it in your garden. So in one sense, you might say that he was mesiach das from this earth. This earth is set aside for garden use, and maybe it's not muchan, it's not prepared for Yom Tov use for kisuy hadam. Yet the Mechaber says, yes, you can use this earth for kisuy hadam, and it is not considered muktzah. Why? Shekol zman shehu tzavor, because as long as that earth remains piled up over there, and you have not taken it and spread it out in your garden or anything else, daitai alav l'chol ma'aseh yitztarich. His mindset is, I have this large quantity of earth piled up, set aside for use. It's true that I brought it in to use it in the garden, but I have a lot. So if I have to use it for something else, I'll use it for something else also. So it's a large quantity, and it's sitting here prepared for use, even though really you had in mind to use it for the garden. But we assume that your das really is that if you need some of it for something else, you use it for something else as well. Aval, however, if you brought in a small box full of soil and you poured it out in the house, you brought it in to use in the garden. So you brought in a box full of soil, you poured it into a nice, neat little pile, and you said, all right, I'm going to use this for the garden. Loi, you're not allowed to use that for kisuy hadam, shemay achar shehu muat, because since there's only a small amount of soil, it's bottle. Now, before I say what I think the Mechaber means over here when he says that it's bottle, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and pay aleph. Lebeisai litzarech ginasai. If you brought a large quantity of soil into the house and you intended it for use in your garden, when you brought it in, you had specific das, you had a specific mindset that you're bringing this soil in because you're preparing it for use in your garden. Lishatcha sham, to spread it out in the garden. Ulakach, and since you had this das, since your das was that you're really setting this soil aside for use in the garden, therefore, dafka imu afar harbe, then you're only allowed to use it for kisuy hadam on Yom Tov if you had a large quantity of soil. Umishum, and the reason it's mutter is, like the Mechaber said, dechol zman shehu tzaver v'chulei, What the Mechaber wrote was, as long as it's piled up, awaiting to be used in the garden, we assume that since you have so much of it, your mindset is if you need some for something else, you use it for something else as well. Aval, however, imrak mile kupasai, if you just filled up a small box with soil for use in the garden, loy, then you cannot use it for kisuy hadam. Va'afilu hinicham b'keren zavis loy mahani. And even though you put it in a nice pile, you set it aside in a corner, we still do not say you could use it. Now, what he's referring to over here is, well, let's read a little further. Masha ein kein b'sif yud zayin. Contrast this to what we're going to see the Mechaber write soon in Sif Yud Zayin. Shehipnus labayis b'stam. In a case where you brought dirt into the house, not with any specific usage in mind. Then, afilu malei kupasai mutter, then even if you brought in a small quantity, only a box full, it's mutter kisheyichid like keren zavis uchidul kameh. If you set it aside in a specific place, you made a nice neat pile and you set it aside, then you can use it. So what's interesting over here is, the Chavetz Chaim is pointing out that on face value, we have a little bit of a stira between Sif Tez Zayin and Sif Yud Zayin. In Sif Tez Zayin, the Mechaber says, if you brought in a large quantity of dirt, so then you could use some of the dirt for kisuy hadam, because since you brought in a large quantity and it's still piled up, ready for use, we assume that you had in mind really that if you need some for something else, you'll use it, and therefore you could use some for kisuy hadam. If you brought in a small quantity, and you brought it in for use in the garden, then you cannot use it for kisuy hadam because you only have a limited amount and you really brought it in for use in the garden. In Sif Yud Zayin, the Mechaber says, if you brought in a small quantity of earth and you brought it in stam, what that means is you didn't bring it in specifically for use in the garden. You brought it in for general use. Well, then, if you put it in a nice corner, in a nice little pile in the house, you could use it for kisuy hadam. So what's the stira? On face value, the stira is, in Sif Tez Zayin, if you have a small quantity of earth, you cannot use it for kisuy hadam. In Sif Yud Zayin, if you have a small quantity of earth, you can use it for kisuy hadam. The difference is in the intent. That's what the Chavetz Chaim is explaining here. In Sif Tez Zayin, you brought in a small quantity of dirt specifically for use in the garden. If you bring in a small quantity of earth specifically for use in the garden, then we're going to say you can't use it for kisuy hadam. You know why? Because you were mesiach das on this small quantity of earth, because you brought it in specifically for use in the garden, and you only have a very limited quantity. And that's why I think that in the last words of Sif Tez Zayin, I hope I'm understanding the Mechaber right, I think what the Mechaber means is the reason if you brought in a small quantity, you can't use it for kisuy hadam, shemai achar shehu mu'at, because since you only have a small quantity, batel, it's batel. What does that mean that it's batel? It's batel to the usage that you brought it in for. You brought it in for use in the garden. So it's only for that usage. I only have a little bit. If I brought in a little bit and I brought it in for use in the garden, I need it all for the garden. So I'm mesiach das on it to use it for anything else. But in Sif Yud Zayin, you didn't bring in the small quantity for use in the garden. You brought in the small quantity for what? For, he says over here in Yud Zayin, you brought it in stam. You brought it in to use it for whatever you need it for. So, okay, if you brought in a small quantity of earth and you put it in the house in a neat pile, so it is set aside for general use. Kisuy hadam is also general use. So you could use it for kisuy hadam. In Sif Yud Zayin, we're going to say, when can you not use it for kisuy hadam? If you brought in a small amount and you spread it out on the floor in the bias, or in the chutzner, then you can't use it for kisuy hadam because it's batel to the karka of the bias, because now it becomes part of the karka of the bias, of the ground, of the floor of the bias, and the floor of the bias is not there for use for kisuy hadam. Okay. Now we continue the Mishnah Berurah cut and pay aleph by the ois kuf beis for the shahar tzion. The yesh ben ha-poskim shesovrin. There are poskim that learn this differently, and they learn that the only time this halacha of Tez Zayin applies is when you brought in the dirt not into the house, you brought it into the garden. Now, obviously, it's difficult to learn the Mechaber that way because the Mechaber says Hichnis Afar Harbe Lebeisai. But there is a discussion amongst the Rishonim, even in the Gemara in Be'ad Dav Chesam and Aleph, on what the Gemara means when the Gemara says Hichnis Afar Harbe. It doesn't say Lebeisai, it says Hichnis. And the Rishonim over there discuss what does it mean that he brought it in? He brought it in where? He brought it into the house or he brought it into the garden? Therefore, there are poskim over here who understand the Mechaber as saying like this. We're talking, and the Mechaber is talking about not where you brought the dirt into the house, you brought the dirt into the garden. The Azamrinon, then we say, Im Humuat, if you brought a small amount of dirt into the garden, Malaikupa v'chayotza, like a box full or something similar, then batal legabe karka hagina. Then the reason you cannot use a small amount of dirt in Sif Tez Zayin is because you brought it into the garden and it becomes bottled to the earth of the garden. But if you brought it into the house or the chutzner, and that's what the Mechaber is discussing in Siv Yud Zayin, then then even if you bring a small amount, and you set up a place for it, ain't a bottle. It's not bottle, and you can use it. Okay. Ice cut and pay bays. The Mechaber said, if you brought in this large quantity of earth, and it's kanus b'makom echad, it's in one nice pile. What the Mechaber means to say is, you didn't take the earth and use it for the purpose that you brought it in for. You brought in a large quantity of earth and you piled it up in the house. This sounds strange to us, but that's because we don't live in an agrarian society. In those days, yes, I guess they had a mud room, literally. So you brought in a large quantity of earth to use later on in the garden, and you made a nice pile, and you did not yet use it in the garden. If it's still there in one pile, then you could use it. You could use it for kisuy hadam, because we say that your stam das is that if you need it for something else, you're going to use it. Says the Mishnah Berurah. The Mechaber says you could use this dirt for what? For kisuy hadam. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you can even shecht lechatchila on Yom Tov based on the fact that you have this large pile of earth, even though you brought it in for the garden, but since you have so much of it, we allow you to use it for kisuy hadam. So you could shecht now on Yom Tov, even lechatchila, because it's considered that you have earth that's mulchan for use for kisuy hadam. And the explanation is because it's prepared for any usage that you need it for. The Achronim right. The Siv Zeh Ma'iri Gam Kein B'Shahaya Ha'afar Tichuach Kamayahi the Sif Yudalit. Of course, we have to be speaking about over here where the earth is Afar Tichuach, where it's loose dirt that's usable for kisuy hadam, like we explained in Sif Yudalit. If it's not Afar Tichuach, if it's not fine, loose, or like sandy, if it's clumps, you can't use it for kisuy hadam. Also, if you want to use this for kisuy hadam, it has to be loose to the degree that you're not going to form a hole in the dirt by taking some of it and using it for kisuy hadam. It has to be loose so that when you take some, it'll cave in and it will not form a hole. Ice cut and pay dalit. The Mechaber said that as long as you have this large quantity of earth and it's still piled up and you did not use it yet, says that Mechaber daitay alav l'chol masha yitztarich. It's considered muchan. It's considered that your mind is ready to use it. Your mindset is that it's available to you l'chol masha yitztarich, for whatever purpose you need. Says the Chavetz Chaim, umashma, the implication of the lashon of the Mechaber is the l'chol tashmish mutter. It's mutter, this dirt is mutter for any usage, not just for kisuy hadam, which is a mitzvah. You brought in a large quantity of earth to use in your garden and you didn't use it yet. It's mutter l'chol masha yitztarich. You could use it for any use that you want. The yesh paiskim, however, there are paiskim shekasu that write shelo elul inyan kisuy, that this heter only applies to kisuy hadam shu tzarich mitzvah, which is a tzarich mitzvah. Aval l'shar tashvi shabloi, but you cannot use it for anything else. Va'afilu le'inyan kisuy, and even to use it for kisuy hadam, these poskim say dafka di'eved. It's only if you're already shechted. Avaloi lishchet l'chatchila al daseh. V'leidami l'sif yud zayin. And again, this is not similar to what we're going to see soon in Sif Yud Zayin. The kan ein achana gemura. Over here, even though this earth is considered muchan for any usage, but it's not really a hachana gemura, because the fact is you brought it in for use in your garden. So this opinion is very machmir. And they say, no, this earth is not muchan for any purpose at all. It's only muchan for kisuy hadam. And it's not just any kisuy hadam, it's kisuy hadam b'di'eved, we were already shechted. But l'chatchila, this stringent opinion would say you can't shecht based on this earth because you weren't really making it for any use. You brought it in with tzarech gina. You brought it in having in mind that you really want to use it for the garden. So it's not really muchan. V'yesh lahachmer kisfarzu, and the Chavetz Chaim says that really you should be machmer like this more stringent opinion. Now we go to Sif Yud Zayin that we keep on mentioning. Says the Mechaber in Sif Yud Zayin, machnis adam b'loiku pasay offer labayis. You could bring a small box of earth into the house of bistam, having no specific intention of what this earth is for, and now you can use it on Yom Tov for whatever purpose you want. We'll see what that's talking about. We do not say we don't say that if you bring in a shoebox full of dirt and you pour it out in the house, that now it becomes bottled to the floor of the bayis and now it's muktzah on Yom Tov. No, we say that you brought it in for general use. In those days when you had earthen floors, you needed earth to cover up dirt on the floor. Dirt was something that you used. So if you brought in a shoebox of dirt before Yom Tov for general purpose, right? It's like we have general purpose flour. I guess then they had sacks of general purpose dirt. So you brought it in for general purpose, so it's usable on Yom Tov. And we do not say that it becomes bottled to the ground of the floor of the house. But the Mechaber gives a caveat, V'hu sheyichad lo karen zavis. That's only if you poured it out and you stored it in a specific corner. What does that mean? That makes it clear that you brought in this dirt to be used as general purpose dirt. You brought it into the house and you poured it out in a nice neat corner and you made a nice neat pile. This is my dirt pile that I'm going to use if I need dirt. That's when we say that it does not become bottle to the karka of the bayis. The kaven shaloy shtachay, because since you didn't spread it out on the floor of the house, muchacha milsa, it's very obvious that you brought it in for general usage. And if this dirt is loose dirt, you could use this general purpose dirt for kisuy hadam. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and pay hay, malay kupasai. You brought in a small box of earth, may erev Yom Tov, on erev Yom Tov, uma'ara oisay ala karka, and you poured it out on the ground of the house. So ois cut and pay vav. If you brought it in bistam, if you brought it in without any specific intention of what you're using it for, ritzon loymar, what the Mechaber means to say is, shaloi chishay behavior l'tzarech gina. You didn't have in mind that you're bringing in this earth for specific use in the garden. Elabistam, you brought it in for general use, like we've been saying. Ice cut and pay zayin. Mechaber told the Ramah said that you should take a look. Vayin le'el and siman shemches ritzon loymar. What the Ramah is alluding to is Shemavur Sham and Sif Kav Zayin is explained over there in Shidches, the mutter af lechasais bait saya. When we say that this dirt that you brought in for general purpose is available for any usage, you could even use it if a child had an accident in the house and you have to cover up some excrement, you could use it for that too. Af the efsher haya loymar, even though you might have thought to say the kavanasai loy haya elo l'davar shetashmishay tadir vaday. It's true that you brought in this dirt to be available for general usage, but probably your mindset was only the types of usages that come up frequently. But not for such a usage to cover up excrement. Who says a child is going to have an accident? Why should you have had that in mind? Yet the halacha is, if you brought in this dirt and you set it aside for general usage, you could even use it for a usage like that, because it's muchan l'chol tzarchay. It's considered muchan for any use at all that you might have. But that again is only true when you brought it into the house with a stam das. that you're bringing it in for general purpose. Then we say that your das was that you can use it for anything that you might possibly need. But if you brought it in for a specific use, a specific, frequent, certain use, like you brought it in to do kisuy hadam when you were shechting a chicken, you knew that you were going to shecht at Yom Tov, so you brought in a shoebox of earth, and your mindset was, I'm going to use it for kisuy hadam, then also lechases by tzoya, then you cannot use it for something like covering up excrement, which is not a common use. The yesh b'kilim gam bazeh. However, there are poskim that are makel even on such a usage. Ois cotton peches. You're allowed to use this dirt, and we don't say that it's batal agav karka habayis. We don't say that it becomes batal to the floor of the house, to the earthen floor of the house, and therefore now it's muktzah. Why would you think it becomes batal? Because it's only a small amount of dirt, like we saw in Sif Tezayin. When it's a small amount of dirt, it could become batal. I understand the Mechaber in Tezayin as saying that when you brought in a shoebox of dirt for the specific use of using it in the garden, you can't use it for kisuy hadam because it's batal. It's batal because it's a small amount. What does it mean over there in Sif Tezayin that it's batal? It's batal to the usage of using it in the garden because you only have a small amount. You brought it in for specifically to use it in the garden, and you don't have any extra. You only have a small amount. So it's batal. It's batal to what? It's batal for garden usage. So now you mesiach das to use it on anything else. In Siv Yud Zayin, we're saying, if you bring in a small amount, so you might have thought that even though you put it in a nice pile in the corner of the house for general purpose, you might have thought that since it's only a small amount, it becomes batal to the ground, to the earthen floor. And the answer is, the Mechaber says it does not. Ice cotton peites, but that's only true if sheyichad like keren zavis, if you set it aside in a corner for usage. The gam tzarich lizar litol mimenu b'shavev alei laseis guma. And now the Chavetz Chaim warns us that when you have this nice, neat pile of dirt that you're going to use for whatever you need dirt for, you have to make sure that when you take the dirt off the pile, you're not forming holes. Or maybe we're talking about where the earth is very sandy and loose, so that if you scoop out some sand, the walls of the hole collapse. And close it up, and therefore you're not making holes. But if you have a pile of thick earth, and now you want to take from it on Yom Tov, and you're going to take a clump, and you're going to dig out a hole, that's a told of chayrish. You're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Ice cotton tzaddik. If you bring in a small amount and you make a pile and you're miyachet keren zavis, you put it in a specific place. You set it up to be stored over there for general usage. The kevin shaloy shtachai, since you didn't spread it out. If you spread it out in the house, it becomes bottled to the floor of the house. Even if you specifically brought it in for use. So you hear what we're saying? If you bring in a shoebox of earth into the house before Yom Tov, and you pour it down into a pile in a keren zavis in a corner somewhere, and you brought it in for general usage, then you could use it on Yom Tov for all sorts of general purpose uses. But if you brought in a shoebox of earth for general purpose use, but then you poured it out on the ground of the house and you spread it out, then it's bottled to the karka abayis, and now it becomes muktzah. Ice cotton sadik aleph. The Mechaber said, "V'im hu offer tichuach." If this dirt is loose dirt, then you could use it for kisuy hadam. Dim loikein. If it's not loose dirt, then you cannot use it for kisuy hadam. Why? Because haloi tzarich kitisha v'aser. Because then you need to grind up the clumps in order to sprinkle it to use it for kisuy hadam, and you're not allowed to do that. That's teichen. That's grinding on Yom Tov, which you're not allowed to do. V'emayri shaloi shachat adayin. If we're talking about a case where you did not yet shecht, tzarich sheyeh offer tichuach kol kach svivav shelabelikachasoi liyaseguma. Then again, once again, the earth has to be loose enough that you're not going to make a hole by scooping any out. Or you have to make sure to take off an even amount. Let's say you have a mound of dirt, you have to scoop off the whole top of the mound so that you're left with something level that you're not making any holes. the chanal. If not, also lechatchila al kalpanim lishchet al dazeh v'chamavur l'mayla. Otherwise, you wouldn't be allowed to shecht lechatchila, relying on this dirt, because you have a problem of mashra gumais. The kasva achrayim, the achrayim say that sias guma, that this issue of making holes in dirt, shayach. This is very interesting halacha. Shayach applies afila bekarka tolush kamay bekanisha afar kfar nitlash v'nechbar. See, the Mishnah Berurah is making a very interesting point over here. We see a halacha over here that if you dig out some dirt from the ground before Yom Tov, you put it in a shoebox, you bring it into the house, and you dump it down on the floor. Now we're saying that you have to be very careful on Yom Tov, that if you take dirt from there, you're not allowed to form a hole. Because if you form a hole in the dirt, that's a told of chayrish. Now that's true, even though we're not talking about dirt that's part of the ground. We're talking about dirt that was already dug out of the ground. It was put into a keli, it was put into a box, and now you pour it on the floor. And there's still an isser of making a hole. Oh, so based on that, the Chavetz Chaim says over here that you see that this isser of making a hole on Shabbos or Yom Tov applies afilu bekarka tolush, even by ground that was earth that was already uprooted from the ground. Because that's our case over here. The dirt was already dug out of the ground. This also would apply to earth inside a keli. So let's say you have a bucket full of soil. You have a flower pot. So you might think that there's no isser of making a hole in the earth of a flower pot. I'm not plowing my flower pot. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no, that would be usser. You're not allowed to stick your finger, let's say, into the dirt of a flower pot on Shabbos or Yom Tov and make a hole. That would be a told of cherish. Well, and based on this, and I'm not sure exactly what case over here the Mishnah Berurah is talking about. I'm holding on Kuf Yud Aleph of an Aleph, right by the Ois Kuf Yud Aleph of the Shar Hatzion. He says over here, according to this halacha, Ein litchayv ner b'keli malei afar. You're not allowed to stick a candle, I guess, into a keli that has dirt in it. Ima afar kashik tzas, if the earth is somewhat firm, shenase guma b'tchivasai, so that when you stick the candle into the dirt, you're going to make a hole in the dirt. De'ima afar tichuach, because if the earth is loose, tekishiyotzienu, so that if you take the nair out, tachzor v'tipo, the hole would collapse. But if the earth is somewhat firm, so if you stick a candle in, you're going to make a hole, and if you take the candle out, that hole is going to remain, that's a problem. When we come up, however, let's say you had a candle that was stuck into earth already before Yom Tov, and now on Yom Tov you want to remove it. Even though when you pull out the candle, you're going to be left with a hole, that's not a problem because you didn't make the hole. The hole was already there. You're just emptying a hole. But it's an existing hole. You didn't make a hole. Okay, we're going to stop over here with Sif Yud Ches on the top of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The discussion of limud HaTorah should be Megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should shik Yeshua's refuas. Parnasa, there's still hope. Mashiach should come before Tisha B'Av. We shouldn't know from Kinnis. We shouldn't know from Eicha. Be well.